Well, thank you, Larry, for that lovely introduction. And I would just like to express my gratitude to the Society of Asian Art and the Asian Art Museum. I'd also like to thank you all for coming this morning. And this museum holds a very special place in my heart. As Larry mentioned, I'm a native San Franciscan. I was born and raised in the city. And one of my earliest memories, in fact, is visiting the museum when it was still in Golden Gate Park. How many of you remember that? Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm in good company. And so when I was in kindergarten, the field trip highlight was going to the museum to see the terracotta soldiers. And they must have planted a seed, because not only am I an Asian art historian, but I also work on the arts of death. And I remember the soldiers looked so tall then, and not so much anymore. So this morning, I'm going to be taking you on a whistle-stop tour of the arts of death and the afterlife in 3 indigenous South Asian religious traditions. And we'll be looking at the arts of Buddhism, of Jainism, and Hinduism in that order. And I'm sure many of you know that Jainism and Buddhism, a lot of their concepts of death and the afterlife, reincarnation, etc., grow out of nascent forms of Hinduism. But curiously enough, the archaeological record in South Asia indicates that visual culture of Buddhism and Jainism actually predates that of Hinduism. So we'll be moving in that order. And I also want to just let you know that I won't be speaking about the art of the other major South Asian indigenous religion, which is Sikhism. And that's because there is not a whole lot of art that addresses our topic for today. So we'll be sticking with these 3 major religions. So I'm sure that the majority of you know that the Buddha was a historical person who lived about 2,500 years ago. And I'm not going to regale you with all the particulars of his hagiography, but I do want to highlight a few points that relate to our topic for today. So the Buddha was born in his last life as a prince, Siddhartha Gautama, in a small Himalayan kingdom called Kapilavastu, about 2,500 years ago. It's now in Nepal. And Prince Siddhartha Gautama had a life of luxury, and really it was very privileged and extremely sheltered. In fact, he didn't leave the palace of Kapilavastu until he was 29 years old. He really lived as one of Kapilavastu's 1%. And then one night, when he was 29 years old, Siddhartha snuck out of the palace. And while he was out on the streets of Kapilavastu, he saw 4 things that he had never seen before that would ultimately give rise to one of the world's great religions. And what he saw was an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and an ascetic. And seeing these things, he realized that it is the fate of all living beings to grow old, to become sick, to suffer, and to ultimately die. And with this realization, Siddhartha became extremely confused and disturbed, because he was rocked by this question of what is the point of living then, if this is our inevitable fate. Ultimately, this inspired him to give up his royal life and to become an ascetic himself on this search of essentially trying to understand the point of living. And he left the palace at Kapilavastu forever, and he took off his rich robes and his jewelry. And that's why, as exemplified by Buddha works of Buddhist art, such as these two from the Avery Brundage collection at the museum, Buddha images do not have adornments. So Siddhartha wandered for many years and studied with sages, and he ultimately came to a city in North India called Bodh Gaya. And he sat under a tree, a type of tree called a Bodhi tree, and he meditated for 49 days and nights. And on his 49th day, night of meditation, unbroken meditation, he finally became enlightened. He discovered these answers that he was seeking. And when he became enlightened, he attained a state of nirvana. Nirvana is the cessation of suffering. It's also described as a state of unboundless bliss and an all-knowing. And a synonym for nirvana is moksha. These are two Sanskrit terms, and the foreign vocabulary that I'll be using, the non-English terms that I'll be using this morning, are from the ancient South Asian language of Sanskrit. Now, nirvana is the term that is used typically for Buddhism, whereas moksha is more often used in Hinduism. They mean the same thing, essentially enlightenment. And that is the goal of these three indigenous South Asian religions: Buddhism, Jainism, and Hinduism. Now, when one attains nirvana, enlightenment, one exhausts their karma. Karma, it literally means in Sanskrit action. And the idea in these three indigenous religions is that every action has an equal reaction. Every action generates by the actor a karmic debt. It creates positive or negative karma. And that karma is what keeps us reincarnating. It keeps us in samsara. So samsara is existence. As we'll see, samsara is the wheel of existence that is, according to these three religions, the first lesson that Siddhartha Gautama learned is characterized ultimately by suffering. That is inescapable. To be in samsara, to exist, is to suffer. So when he became enlightened, when he attained nirvana, Siddhartha Gautama became a Buddha. A Buddha means an enlightened one or an awakened one who is awakened to the nature of reality. And more specifically, we can refer to him as the Buddha, capital T, capital B, or the Buddha Shakyamuni. And this is the name for this particular Buddha. The Shakya clan was his family's clan. Muni is sage. So it's the sage of the Shakya clan. We refer to him as the Buddha or the Buddha Shakyamuni to distinguish this particular Buddha from the innumerable other Buddhas. We're told, according to Buddhist sutras or sacred scriptures, that there are innumerable Buddhas. They have different cosmic duties, and there are Buddhas for each historical era. The Buddha Shakyamuni is the Buddha for our historical era. A Buddha preaches the Dharma. The Dharma is the universal laws of how to become enlightened, how to attain nirvana, how to get off this cycle of existence that's characterized by suffering, samsara. And when the Dharma is forgotten on earth, when it's no longer accessible, a new person will take birth, become enlightened, and re-preach the Dharma. So there will be another Buddha for the next historical era. So I want to just take a moment to turn our attention to these two exquisite sculptures in the museum's collection. I want to discuss how different and yet how similar they are, even though they're separated by thousands of miles, their place of origin, and of course, several centuries. Now, the image on the left here was created in the Gandharan region. Gandharan region is a very important area for the development of both Mahayana Buddhism. This is a major school of Buddhism that arose circa 100 CE. And it was also a very important place for the development of early Buddha images. The Gandharan region today is divided between the modern countries of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the Gandharan region in the period from about 200 to 700 CE was on a major artery of the Silk Road. So it was very cosmopolitan. It was well connected culturally and artistically and economically with Imperial Rome. And that's why works of Buddhist art from the Gandharan region look very Western classical. They have this kind of what we describe as Roman-style wet drapery with these very sharp pleats, and the face looks very similar to the face of a statue from the Western classical world. These sharper features, the kind of aquiline nose, etc. Now, compare that stylistically. Whoops, I don't want to fall off the stage here. I want to compare this stylistically to this sculpture from northeastern India, from the modern state of Bihar, the Buddha with a devotee from several centuries later, from 5 to 700 CE. And as you can see, the figure's body is much smoother. We get very little sense of drapery. But we do see the monastic robe, just suggestions of that with the two lines at the neck and then at the bottom here. But we can recognize both of these statues, of course, as Buddhas because of the iconography. The cranial protuberance, what is called the Ushnisha, the Urna, or the third eye, and of course the lack of adornments, because remember when Prince Siddhartha Gautama gave up his royal life to become an ascetic, he removed all of his royal adornments. I want to go in for a closer look at this particular image here of the Buddha with a devotee. So this is a detail of the devotee and the Buddha's lower level here. And so we have a idealized figure of the donor or the patron of this particular work of art. And we know that because of the posture of reverence. He's kneeling before the Buddha. His hands are in Anjali Mudra, or a a posture of prayer as he kneels before the Buddha. And we also have a donative inscription at the base of the sculpture here. And it's inscribed, "This is the pious gift of the monk," whose name is unintelligible, it's been worn off over the years, "for the attainment of supreme knowledge by his father and teachers and all living beings." So this raises an important point about patronage in Buddhist art. And the idea is that patronage, to commission a work, to give money, to cause a work to be made, generates good karma. And that would then ideally inform a better rebirth along in samsara. And but this monk is specifically donating that good karma to his father and teachers and all living beings, which is very pious. The idea is that one is causing that, generating good karma also for the artist, if they make the work correctly, and it's also enabling others to worship the work of art. And we see the actualization of the patron actually getting that good karma, because the standing Buddha above him is expressing this mudra or hand gesture, Varada mudra, which is the hand gesture of dispensing boons or blessings. So it shows us the action of this, or reaping the fruits of the benefit of his patronage. On the back of this sculpture, we have a very low relief of a stupa, and a stupa is a reliquary. And then this inscription down here tells us, "The Buddha has explained the cause of all things that arise from a cause. He, the great monk, that is the Buddha, has also explained their succession." Now, this is what is called the Buddhist creed, and the Buddha tells us that everything, what it comes from, and then ultimately how to get off of that wheel of samsara, so that there is everything arises from a cause, and then we can escape that. So the Buddha preached the Dharma, how to get off of the wheel of samsara, these universal laws throughout north central India until his death, which was when he was about 80 years old. However, when a Buddha dies, we don't refer to it as the death. We refer to it as the Party Nirvana. And that is the final death, or the extinguishing. When a being has their Party Nirvana, they will no longer reincarnate. They're free from this cycle of samsara. They're no longer going to be subjected to existence which is characterized by suffering. Now, once again, this is the goal of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism. And the Buddha's Parinirvana is a popular subject in Asian art, well, throughout Asia. And there is an established iconography. We have the Buddha, as we see in this deep relief, again from the Gandharan region. The Buddha is stretched out very peacefully, depicted as if he is asleep. He's at peace. However, the attendants, these monks that are with him at the moment of his death, they are the picture of a very visceral lamentation. They're mourning the passage of their teacher. Now, notice how this figure here is, he's leaning back and he's expressing his grief at the loss of his teacher. He's got his hand up there, as does this figure here, and this guy is wailing. And really, to be mourning the passage of the Buddha is to be missing the point. The Buddha has attained the goal that he sought. He is no longer going to reincarnate. He is no longer going to be subjected to suffering. And so to mourn his passage, really, it would be considered selfish and to be a mark of not really fundamentally understanding the teachings, to miss the point, essentially. And notice the very same expressions of the Party Nirvana from an entirely different time and place. This is a depiction of the Party Nirvana from circa 711 from the Horioji Pagoda in Japan. Now, whereas the Gandharan image is very much characterized stylistically by influence from the Western classical world, here we have influence from the Tang Chinese Buddhist tradition, but still we see very visceral depictions of suffering and loss. Look at this figure here who's letting out this wail at this very sad moment, and the extremely peaceful Buddha who's no longer going to reincarnate. So with the Parinirvana of the Buddha, that ended his final life. But we're told by a number of sutras or scriptures that he had a number of previous lives. And in previous lives, the Buddha was born as an animal or as a human. And these are outlined in the Jataka tales. And the Jataka tales are kind of like folk tales. They're morality tales. They each have a moral, and they teach people, especially lay people, so non-members of the monastic community, qualities to cultivate so that they too can accumulate good karma, so that they can achieve a better rebirth. Because through all of these previous lives, the Buddha generated good karma. He did something extraordinary in each of these lives, which ultimately led him to have the very fortuitous final life of being reborn as Prince Siddhartha Gautama, and then becoming an ascetic, and then attaining nirvana. Now this is a tanka. A tanka is a painting on cloth. Tankas are very much associated with the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, or what is also known as Vajrayana Buddhism. That is the thunderbolt vehicle of Buddhism, and I'll speak more about this in a moment. But it's this particular tanka from Bhutan. Bhutan is part of the wider Tibetan Buddhist world. This particular tanka depicts the Buddha seated centrally, and we see all of these iconic moments from key Jataka tales, his previous lives. And I want to call your attention to my favorite one, which is Mahasattva Jataka. And in Mahasattva Jataka, the Buddha was born in a previous life as Prince Mahasattva. and he was out hunting with his two brothers one afternoon, and the trio stumbled upon a tigress with her cubs, and the tigress was starving to death, which not only put her life in jeopardy, but that of her cubs. She was starving, so she was unable to generate milk to nurse them. And Prince Mahasattva was so moved by compassion that he lay down and he offered himself to the tigress so that she could eat him and then nourish her cubs, which is what we have here. Now, in different traditions, we see Prince Mahasattva having jumped from a cliff and then splattering himself so that the tiger can better lap up the blood. Here it looks like he has been, he's stabbed himself or been shot by an arrow, but we see the moment where the tigress is eating him, and at the moment of his death, he is generating good karma that will allow him to have a better rebirth, ultimately to be reborn as Prince Siddhartha Gautama and become enlightened as the Buddha. So what is known as the Buddhist wheel of life and death really lays out visually, especially for non-literate lay people, how karma generates rebirth. So how we have karmic merit and demerit, and all of the stations within samsara that one could possibly find themselves in a future rebirth. So the Buddhist wheel of life and death, this is an example. There are many, many of these. I'd say especially in Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism, this is one of the most popular types of art. The Buddhist wheel of life and death is also called the wheel of samsara. Remember, samsara is existence. It's also called the bhava chakra. Bhava is existence or being. Chakra is wheel. And in the Buddhist tradition, existence or samsara is visualized as a never-ending wheel that just goes on and on and on unless one attains nirvana and is able to get off of that wheel. Again, the goal of these three indigenous South Asian religions. So this is a tanka from Tibet from circa 1800 to 1900. And again, a very didactic tool. The Venerable Lama or monk Dzongtsar Khyentse tells us one of the reasons the wheel of life was painted outside the monasteries and on the walls and was really encouraged even by the Buddha himself was to teach this very profound Buddhist philosophy of life and perception to more simple-minded farmers or cowherds. So these images on the wheel of life are just to communicate to the general audience. So a didactic tool for the non-literate that would be then unpacked verbally by the monks when pilgrims came to monasteries. And so the Wheel of Life tells us every possible station on samsara. And on Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhist temples, before you go into the building itself, typically there will be painted as a mural outside the Wheel of Life. So each one of these tankas or the mural depicting this subject, of course, will be different. There's stylistic variations, but there is an established iconography. So the major elements will always be the same. In the center is what are known as the three poisons. And these are what keep us fastened to the wheel of samsara, keep us in existence, keep us turning around on that endless wheel. And so in the center of the wheel of life and death, we have a snake, we have a pig, and a rooster. The snake represents aversion, the rooster delusion, and the pig attachment. So these are elements that keep us clinging, that keep us attached to this wheel and keep coming back. So we also see the highs and lows of samsara. Here we see the descending order, these figures chained, being pulled by a demon here down, and they're just cascading down here into the lower hell realms, as we'll see in a moment. And then we see figures who have accumulated positive karma. These would be lay people, pious lay people, as we can see because they're holding prayer beads. And then we see a monk, someone who has attained enough good karma in a past life to become a monk. And then finally, a Buddha. So descending and ascending along this wheel of samsara. I'm going to actually come down here. So moving along to the second band here, these are what I refer to as stations of samsara, these little pieces of the pie here. And these are all the possible realms in which we can find ourselves born into. So we have the realm of the gods in heaven. And the gods live very, very long lives. They have ideal lives. They want for nothing. They lives of luxury. But in fact, being reborn as a god is not actually ideal, because we're told in Buddhist sutras that gods have such a pleasant life that they see no suffering and that they're not provoked then to wonder, just like, remember, Siddhartha Gautama did. That led him on his journey to become an ascetic and then ultimately to discover, to attain nirvana. So gods really don't, they don't cultivate, they don't have opportunities so much to cultivate good karma. And they might actually generate negative karma and find themselves in a lower realm in their next rebirth. Now, a lower rebirth is as an animal, and the animal realm is not a very pleasant realm to be in. Wild animals are constantly on the run. They're constantly in fear for their life. Beasts of burden are worked hard or they're killed for food. And then we have the hell realms. And these are, of course, a really bad place to be born into. And as we're going to see, hell realms throughout these three different religious visual traditions are often very graphically, very viscerally depicted. And because this is a didactic tool, and you want to scare the audience into being good to generate good karma. So here we've got these images of figures being stirred in a cauldron here. We've got figures that are being roasted on a pillar of fire, being menaced and chopped up by demons. Very bad place to be. And then another separate hell is the hell of the hungry ghosts. And I think this sounds like possibly the worst hell because, as we're told by Buddhist sutras, sacred scriptures, we're told that the hungry ghosts have necks as thin as needles, yet bellies as big as mountains. So physically, they are unable to satiate themselves, no matter how much they eat. And it's very difficult for them to eat. And when they do eat, whatever they touch turns to fire. They consume that, and that sounds like a very bad case of indigestion. So we've got these poor beings here, and this guy is being stomped upon by a demon. But if you find yourself reborn as a hungry ghost, remember me telling you this, that this is none of these stations on Samsara are permanent. This is not a permanent state of being. And this is a major difference, of course, from the three Abrahamic or monotheistic traditions. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, where heaven and hell are permanent states. In Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism, they are temporary, and the soul exhausts their karma, and then they are reborn in a better or worse realm. So, and it goes on and on and on. That's why it's depicted as a circle, constantly in motion. And this poor guy with his belly as big as a mountain is burping fire here. And so on, we also have a human realm. And in fact, these three different religions, these three indigenous religions tell us that the human realm is very special. It's actually the most desirous realm to be reborn into. It is the shortest lifespan, but it's the only realm or the only rebirth in which someone can attain nirvana. The beings in hell are suffering too much to spend time cultivating good karma, or they have no hope of attaining enlightenment. It's only in the human realm that one can attain enlightenment. So it's considered to be very rare and extremely special and prized. So the ultimate message is, don't waste this precious opportunity. And the ultimate goal, the top of the wheel, is enlightenment. Now notice also that each of these realms have a Buddha who is preaching to these beings in each realm. So there's the possibility of hearing the Dharma in each realm. Moving outward to the rim of the wheel, we have what is called the 12 links of dependent origination. These are depicted in these little cartouches along here. Now, these illustrate how these qualities, especially human qualities, again, that we have that keep us fastened to the wheel of samsara. For example, what is known as upadana, which is grasping. And iconographically, grasping is depicted as either a monkey or a human reaching for fruit. So the idea is that grasping, of course, we're always wanting, we're clinging to something, and ultimately that will cause suffering if we don't get it or we lose interest in it. So it's qualities like this that keep us fastened to the wheel of samsara. So the wheel of birth and death is always held by this figure Yama. Yama is the god of death and punishment and justice, and we'll see him again in the Hindu tradition. Yama's iconography is, he is this very stocky figure with these big fangs and these long talonous hands. He grips the entire wheel of birth and death. And as the Lord of Death, that's not surprising, because death is what ends and really begins each new rotation on the wheel of samsara. And it ends one birth and begins another in reincarnation. So he always has, well, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, he always has this headdress of these grinning skulls, these kind of Mori Morti. And the Wheel of Samsara also always has a depiction of the Buddha who is pointing, showing us how to get off the wheel of samsara. Now notice up here we see this golden orb that has figures in what in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition in Vajrayana is referred to euphemistically as an ecstatic embrace. And I think that's referring to Tantra here. Tantra is an offshoot of Vajrayana Buddhism. Vajrayana Buddhism is it's esoteric Buddhism, and as I mentioned, it literally means the thunderbolt vehicle of Buddhism. It requires years of practice and initiation, working with a teacher to be able to practice esoteric rituals and meditations, etc. And we'll see in a moment some examples of esoteric ritual objects that are used for this worship. So in some traditions of Vajrayana, Tantra is a way to achieve realization. It's a meditational practice that actually literally does engage in sexual intercourse as a way for the two partners to engage in meditation as a path to liberation or nirvana. So that's referenced up here. And then the Buddha is pointing over the head of Yama to a bodhisattva. Now, that's what this figure is here. A bodhisattva is a compassionate being, very, very central in Mahayana and especially in Vajrayana or Tibetan Buddhism. As compassionate beings, bodhisattvas are enlightened, but they vow to not attain Party Nirvana, to come back, to keep reincarnating, to preach the Dharma to all of these beings in samsara, until all sentient beings, all beings with a soul, until we all attain nirvana. So they keep reincarnating to teach the Dharma. Now, this is a particular bodhisattva. There are numerous ones, and they each have their own iconography. We can recognize them from their symbols. This is the bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. And his name translates roughly to the Lord who looks down on samsara and all of our suffering. And quite often, Avalokiteshvara is depicted in this emanation of Padmapani. Padmapani literally means the lotus holding one. And as we see here, he is holding a lotus. Now, I'm sure you've seen the ubiquity of lotuses throughout Asian art in all religious traditions. And lotuses are very much symbols of purity, the enlightened mind. If you've ever seen a lotus growing, they've got this amazing propensity to grow out of dirty muck and have these luminous blossoms that are not touched by the dirty water out of which they grow. So it's the way a bodhisattva is in the world, enlightened but not tainted by samsara. So that is the symbolism of Padmapani. Now, in Vajrayana and Mahayana Buddhism, actually to become a bodhisattva is considered to be the most noble, foremost goal, rather than immediately attaining Party Nirvana, or Nirvana, and then not coming back. So that is considered to be the most compassionate, the most immediate goal for Mahayana and Vajrayana Buddhists. Now, especially Vajrayana Buddhism engages with a number of Memento Mori. Of course, not a Sanskrit term, a Latin term. And this literally means in Latin, remember that you will die. And so with Vajrayana Buddhism, there are a number of works of art that are highly symbolic. And they use symbolism as well as actual body parts to really get this idea home that we will die. And so to not get caught up in what is known as the Maya, or the illusion that keeps us fastened to this wheel of samsara, this clinging, this upadaya, etc. And it's important to keep in mind that these Memento Mori, especially when they are very scary, when they use visceral death imagery, that they were originally created to be viewed by those who had gone through lengthy initiation practices, that they had received very lengthy training with a teacher, and they would be engaged in rituals, meditational practices, etc. So all of these symbols would be very much understood by the original audience of a work of art such as this cabinet for storing offerings, which is in the museum. It's originally from Tibet. And it's important to keep in mind that when we look at works such as this and some of the others that I'll be showing you, that they were never intended to be in a museum or on my screen here. They were never intended to be viewed by the general public because their messages can be misunderstood. They can be very scary when you first see them if you don't have the proper training. So this cabinet for storing offerings would have contained probably butter and barley flour that would be used to construct offerings, probably for a wrathful deity. Now, especially in Vajrayana Buddhism, as we'll see, there's a number of wrathful deities. These deities look initially scary. They look ferocious, terrible, and that they evoke terror, and that's their point. They are protector deities. And for the initiate, they would be, comforting, they would protect them, and they would menace forces that impede nirvana, such as ignorance or sloth or grasping or something. This particular cabinet is painted black, and it has these highly symbolic images throughout. We've got these grinning skulls, very similar to what we saw on Yama's headdress. And we have at the top these festoons of entrails. And they are suspending skins of an elephant. And I wonder, we have a school group. Oh no, they're going to get nightmares now if they didn't see this. So we have a suspended skin of an elephant here, and then a suspended skin of a human. There are a number of body parts, kind of disjuncta membra floating around, eyeballs hanging off of the entrails. We have a hungry ghost right here, and ferocious animals. And we also see these skull caps, what are called kapalas, which are very significant in esoteric Buddhism. They symbolize the seat of the ego, and as we'll also see, they are used as ritual implements. This is our hungry ghost here, who looks just really terrified as he's stuck in this unpleasant realm. So here we see a kapala, or a skull cap, that is overflowing with blood, and it's also supporting the sense organs. We've got ears, we've got a nose, eyes, and a tongue. Now, again, these are the organs that we use to cling. We taste, we hear, they help us generate karma, keeping us in the wheel of samsara. And notice how they are being plucked by these crows or vultures here. That to me signifies that this section of the cabinet is probably depicting what's called a sky burial in Tibetan Buddhism. Now, Tibet is a very topographically, a very unique part of the world. It's extremely arid, it's above the tree line, and wood is very much at a premium. So whereas most other parts of the Buddhist world cremate the dead, in Tibet, what is much more common is a sky burial. And in a sky burial, monks chop up the body of the deceased and feed it to vultures. So this is a ritual act for the monks, because they are seeing the impermanence of the body, that ultimately death will come to us all. But it's also enabling the corpse after death to continue to generate good karma, because they are feeding living beings. And so when all of the flesh and the organs are consumed by the vultures, then the bones are ground into rocks, and they are scattered to the winds. So also I want to call your attention to this figure here that has more death imagery. It is supposed to be a wild ass or wild donkey, and he's got a human skin as part of the saddle, a skull here, and a snake winding around the back. Now, the presence of this wild ass who is all harnessed up indicates that this particular cabinet was probably used for offerings for the deity, the protector deity, who is known as Palden Lamo. And Palden Lamo is a deity that is very important in Tibetan Buddhism. She is associated with, she protects Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. She also protects the Dalai Lamas, and she looks particularly ferocious. She always has these wide staring eyes and these fangs here. She holds a kapala, a skull cup that is, it has blood, and here she is riding on her wild ass with the skinned person as her saddle. She rides over a sea of blood. Now, again, a figure such as this would be terrifying to someone who didn't understand the symbolism, who wasn't initiated, or a figure who was attempting to stop the initiate from continuing on their cultivation. And so it's a very terrible protector deity. Now, in fact, Palden Lamo, like so many of these other protector deities, five minutes before our break, no problem. Palden Lamo, okay, I'll go on, but she's really exquisite, and I love this incredible detail with these heads and the hands that are her girdle here. So just replete with all of this, this death imagery, reminding us that we will die ultimately. And these are her two attendants that are called Dakinis, who are equally ferocious and equally adorned with death imagery. This one here has a necklace of skinned arms and these terrifying composite animal heads, lion and I guess a vulture here, as they stride over this sea of blood at the bottom. Okay, so the last two works of art that I want to show you before the break, once again, are Memento Mori. And these are actual remains of humans that would be used for ritual purposes. And so we have this ewer that would be used for dispensing water during the ritual honoring a ferocious deity, perhaps like Palden Lamo. That is comprised of 2 skull caps for the belly of the ewer. The rest of it is copper. And then we have a human thigh bone trumpet. And these 2 works of art or ritual implements they're both from Mongolia, which is part of the Tibetan Buddhist world. And they were also both made during China's Qing dynasty. The Qing emperors were followers of Tibetan Buddhism. And not just any bones would be used for ritual implements such as this. We're told that it would be typically bones of a revered teacher, and the idea is that some of their energy retains in the fabric of the bone. So it's beneficial and considered to be even more powerful to use in ritual. And so for the what's known as a Kangling thigh bone trumpet, Kangling literally means femur bone. Notice how ornate the metal of the head of the trumpet is. It depicts what's known as a makara, and we also see the makara up here. These are apotropaic or evil or negative energy dispelling kind of heads, and you see them in Tibetan art and even architecture quite a bit. So that's the makara. And the Kangling thigh bone trumpet was created to be used in what's known as a chod ceremony. In the chod ceremony, again, someone would need to have had extensive training and had been initiated to participate in this. This is when initiates meditate on a corpse. And they do this to fundamentally understand the impermanence of the human body. And so to not get attached to it, to not cling to it, and then to focus on cultivating good karma and the path to nirvana. So this would be blown during a ritual such as that. And both of these works live in the museum. And I think I've extended my 5 minutes. Docents brought to my attention. So I understand that as part of your docent training, especially with Buddhist art and Buddhist Buddha iconography, I referred to the urna at the dot between the eyebrows on the forehead as a third eye. As my students would say, that was my bad. And it truly is not a third eye. It's an auspicious mark, one of the lakshanas, to be able to identify an enlightened being. It's typically referred to often in scholarship as a third eye, and I kind of understand it as a mark of being able to see metaphorically more than we as unenlightened beings with our 2 eyes can see. But truly, it's not, properly speaking, a third eye. So I appreciate that. And okay, so we are moving along, and now we are looking at Jain works of art. This is a sculpture of a Jinnah or a Tirthankara, and he is holding what is known as Dhyana Mudra. Mudra is hand gesture, and he's holding the hand gesture of meditation, indicating that he is meditating. Now, you would be forgiven if you walked into the Dallas Museum of Art and identified this figure as a Buddha. But it is not, and there's 2 specific elements with the iconography that identify this figure as a Jinnah, or also called Tirthankara. And one is that the figure is naked. There's no line, these are just rings on the neck rather than points of the monastic robe. And this very conspicuous design on his chest, which is a Srivatsa. And that is just an auspicious mark that is largely unique to these Jain figures. Now, a Jinnah literally means a victor, V-I-C-T-O-R, a victor that has conquered samsara or delusion, is enlightened. And a Tirthankara literally means a forward crosser. The idea is that these enlightened Jain figures have crossed this ocean of samsara, and they show the way for the rest of us to also attain enlightenment. Now, this particular figure who lives in Dallas is he was probably created by what's known as the Shvetambara group of Jains. And the Shvetambaras are ones who wear white monastic robes. And so Jains are very similar to Buddhists, but in fact Jainism predates Buddhism. And just like Buddhas, there have been the major figure that becomes enlightened and shows the way is one of these Jinnahs or Tirthankaras rather than a Buddha. And just like Shakyamuni Buddha is the Buddha for our historical era, Mahavira is the Tirthankara for our historical era. And Jainism also has a very well-organized establishment of the cosmos and different types of rebirths that are possible. And very typically I'm just going to walk down here again so I can see the screen as well. And a monk by the name of Sri Chandra in 1136 wrote down what is known as the Samagrantiratana, which is an exposition of the cosmos. And it's illustrated, its iconography is as the Triloka. That means the three worlds. And within these three worlds, they're visually depicted as a cosmic man, the Loka Purusha. So whereas we saw the Buddhist Samsara as a circle, the same concept pretty much is vertical on the cosmic man. So we have the lower realm, Ardhaloka, which is the hells, and there are a number of different levels on these hells. The Madhya Loka, or middle realm, is the human and animal realm. And Urdhva Loka is the heavens, which are on the Loka Purusha's torso. And then off of the body itself is the Siddhasila, or the abode of the liberated beings. But we are, as beings in samsara, we can be reborn in any of these, anywhere in the Triloka, or the three worlds. Now, the majority of works of Jain art are from northwestern India, the states, modern states of Gujarat or Rajasthan, because historically and even today, that's where the largest concentration of Jains are. This is a manuscript that lives at the British Library, and it dates to the 18th century. So it gives it out to us, the cosmos, visually. And this is a section from actually another manuscript from the 17th century that shows us Urdhva Loka, which is heaven, and it has the central god there. Doesn't this look like a great place to spend a very long time? He is reposing on a dais here, and he is being offered wine. He's being fanned with fly whisks, which are a pan-Indic symbol of extraordinariness, symbols of deities or royalty. He's being entertained by dancers. But once again, just like I mentioned in the Buddhist Wheel of Samsara, this is not an ideal rebirth, because with all of these luxuries, a god such as this he's distracted. He's not suffering at all. So he is not going to be cultivating good karma or working on spiritual progression. We certainly don't want to be reborn in one of the hell realms. There are 7 of these, and they each have their own guardians, minor deities who are associated with their own vahanas or vehicles. And it's always interesting how, I think in almost all world religious artistic traditions, there's always more attention paid to depictions of hell, the stick rather than the carrot. And I also imagine that artists have a lot more fun depicting hell than they do heaven. So we saw the image of the god. Now here in these images of hell, we've got these poor figures skewered down at the bottom, and heads are poking out of these vessels here. In one of the hells where they're being roasted, an attendant is basting this guy who is on the flames here. It's a very unpleasant rebirth. But once again, if you find yourself reborn in a heaven, don't get too comfortable, because it's not permanent. And if you find yourself being basted over flames, also don't despair too much, because it might be for a couple hundred years or so, but it's not permanent. permanent. Just like I explained in Buddhism, in Jainism, the idea is that these are not permanent stations in samsara. So moving to what we could call the sweet spot, Madhya Loka, that is the human realm. And in the human realm, once again, this is the place where we want to be reborn. And this is the place where we've all had the fortune to be born in this birth. So that is the only place that one can cultivate and has a chance of becoming enlightened, which is the goal, once again, getting off of the wheel, or getting out of samsara in all of these three indigenous South Asian religions. So this is a diagram of the human realm, and in the middle of our Loka Purusha here, and the human realm is called Ardhai Dvipa, and that is the land of 2.5 continents. It's where animals and humans can be reborn, but only humans, we're told, can become enlightened. So it's very carefully laid out, and the Ardhai Dvipa, and it's bound by this mountain chain called Manustotara, which outside of that, humans cannot exist. So we can only exist inside of this realm here. We've got 2 oceans. One is the Black Ocean, and then moving inward, we have the Salt Ocean. And then we have this cosmic pillar, Mount Meru, that links all of the stations in samsara, the Triloka. And so it really amazes me that Sri Chandra thought all of this out and wrote it down in such meticulous detail, and then it's illustrated over and over again as a didactic tool to teach Jains really to prize this very special rebirth as a human in Madhya Loka on Ardhai Dvipa. So moving on to Hinduism, we saw this figure earlier, of course. We saw him in the Buddhist wheel of birth and death. This is Yama. And also, just like in Buddhism, Yama is, in Hinduism, he is the Lord of Death. He's also responsible for punishment, justice, and he's the Lord of Hell. Now, he's also called Yam Raj. Raj is a word that means king. So he's the king or the Lord of death, punishment, hell, and justice, etc. Now, Yam Raj he's not a bad guy. He's not a demon. He is a very important figure. We need justice. We need punishment. And he is depicted, because he's an important figure, he's depicted as a king. Remember the Raj. So a part of his kingly iconography is that he's seated on his vahana, or his vehicle, which is a buffalo. He's seated in what's known as the posture of royal ease, and that's with one leg up, one pendant, typically balanced like here on a lotus. And this is part of what I refer to, just like the fly whisks, as the Indic iconography of extraordinariness, because it's only deities and members of the royalty who are depicted holding this posture. He has a mace. His iconography is also a lasso. He's able to bring people back in to receive their punishment. And again, he is a king, so he has a crown as well as all these other very rich adornments. And just like we saw in the Tibetan tanka, he typically has these fangs here that are just kind of snaking out of the corner of his mouth. So this particular sculpture, which is from northeastern India, the modern state of Odisha, he would have been one of the Ashtadikapalas, and this literally means eight directional guardians. And so Yamraj is associated with the inauspicious, in Hinduism, direction of the south. So this sculpture would probably have been on the southern side of a temple. Now, Yamraj is also, he's a very important figure in terms of he makes appearances in some of the Upanishads and other religious Hindu literature. He's also very intelligent, and he explains punishment and also the nature of being. So, for example, in the Katha Upanishad, which is dated to circa 5th century BCE, he's explaining to a young boy that the seer, which is the true self, often called the Atman, or the soul, is not born, nor does he die. He does not originate from anybody, nor does he become anybody. Eternal, ancient one. He remains eternal. He is not killed, even though the body is killed. The self, that is Atman, smaller than small, greater than great, is hidden in the heart of each creature, free from avarice, free from grief, peaceful and content. He sees the supreme glory of Atman. So this speaks to the eternal, what keeps reincarnating and is subject to coming back in samsara. So that's some of the wisdom of Yamraj, or Yama. So Yamraj, as a king, each king has their court, and especially in later paintings from North India, such as this one from Guler, which was a small kingdom in the Himalayas from circa 1800, we see Yamraj seated centrally in his darbar, or his court. So this is the court of Yamraj, which is in hell. And he is there presiding over his court, and his important attendant is his secretary, whose name is Chitragupta. And Chitragupta, we're told, writes down every person's actions and then reads them out when they are brought to the court of Yamraj, when they're brought to Yamraj, his darbar. So here we see him enthroned like a king, and Chitragupta is writing down, he is getting ready to read out this whole, poor guy's, all of his actions. And then Yamraj will decide what his punishment is, where he will go in his next birth. So I think that this painter, Gursaha, had at least seen Mughal painting, if not seen Mughal architecture itself, because as a king, in his darbar, as his court, Yamraj is he's enthroned in a pavilion that is clearly made out of white marble, and it looks to me very Mughal. And it's also this kind of inside-outside, these two perspectives of showing the interior of the court and the exterior. That's also very Mughal. So on the exterior, we see all of, once again, these very graphic depictions of punishment. This is a didactic device. This is you're supposed to look at this, and it's supposed to spur you into doing good actions and to cultivate good karma. There's always a lot of skewering going on in these images. We have a figure who wears see this guy who is strapped to a post here, and he's being whipped. This guy is shackled with a and his legs are being whipped. Looks like his tongue is about to be pulled out. Extremely visceral. I imagine this is for punishment for people who were cruel to birds in their previous life. We'll see other images of that because these birds are then pecking them as they're stuck in these wells or something here. And here we see Yamraj. By the way, unlike in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, Yamraj's iconography in Hindu art is that he is typically depicted as blue. And here he has this kind of smoky blue complexion. Here is Chitragupta, who is writing down all of the actions of this guy as he's being his final judgment. And some of these very graphic scenes up close. So some of my favorite works of Hindu art that deal with death and punishment are from the modern period. And these are called the Karni Barni prints. These really went viral in the colonial period. And the colonial period in the late 19th century brought new technologies of reproducing, and in fact mass producing art very cheaply and in color. So in the late 19th, early 20th century, chromolithographic prints flooded the market, and they were available to very cheaply for the masses. And these Karni Barni prints, Karni refers to karma, and Barni refers to bharna, or like the wages. So the wages of karma. It's like a little sing-song title that is easy to remember. And I don't know of any of these Karni Barni prints that show heaven. And once again, hell is always so much more fun to see unless you're in it. And they depict the darbar, or the court of Yamraj, who once again is depicted as blue. He's presiding over his court. And there is Chitragupta, who is with his scroll of everyone's deeds. And clearly, these are recent arrivals in his assembly. And they are very penitent. They have their hands fervently together, beseeching for a better rebirth. Now, this is from Calcutta, from circa 1880, and here it tells us that this is from the Dharmraj, so the Lord of Dharma, these universal laws, the Sabha, or Sabha is an assembly. So the assembly of the Lord of these universal laws. And again, these extremely graphic, gruesome punishments that each one is labeled. And we're told down here in Bangla, see how severe is the punishment of the sinner in hell. So avoid actions that are sinful. And I imagine that work such as this would be given to children to keep them in line, and that that really keeps children acting well. And so we see this very visceral image of a guy having his tongue pulled out. Unfortunately, because these were mass produced, this is not a poor or a low resolution reproduction, because these were printed so quickly and en masse. A lot of them are very fuzzy, so I can't read the Bangla here, but I imagine this guy having his tongue pulled out would be a liar or something. We've got someone who's again being roasted, someone who is being sawed in half at various junctures in his body, and someone who is being milled on a wheel that is pulled by an oxen. I imagine that would be someone who was cruel to animals, as we'll see. Again, boiling seems to be a very common punishment. And a woman who is being beaten by a demon. Quite often in these prints, the women who are punished were adulteresses. And so in the Karni prints, we see the fruits of their one-to-one, and it tells us visually and in text and image, in fact, very clearly what someone has done and then the fruit for that action. So for example, here we are told that this is Pakshi Marne Ka Phal. That means the fruit of killing birds. And then we've got this little whippersnapper here who is aiming at the bird, and then his very unfortunate rebirth in a hell where he's being pecked by birds for a very long time. As someone who is very dedicated to animal rights, I support this. Sounds good to me. Now, this one here, we're told that this is Pati Todne Ka Phal. Any Hindi speakers in the audience? Okay, so Pati Todne Ka Phal, as you know, is the fruit for chastising the husband. Yes. I have never seen any Patni Todne Ka Phal, though, which would be the fruit of chastising the wife. So here this woman is, and she has her finger out, which is the kind of iconographic gesture of in Indian art of chastising, and her poor henpecked husband is imploring her to stop, and then her rebirth is having the finger wagging hands chopped off by a demon. I know. And yes, but what I also love is that there's like it's so typical in South Asian art, the emotion is not carried by the facial expressions, and she's got this stoic poker face, and she also keeps her lovely earrings. So the last type of work that I would like to discuss with you are called yama pots. And yama pots are these long illustrated scrolls that are particular to northeastern India, largely the state of West Bengal and the modern country of Bangladesh. And the pots themselves, the pot is just a scroll, and we know from primary sources that artists and minstrels who are from the same community, the Potoa community, they have been making these for hundreds of years, these story scrolls. And in the pre-modern period, they would, the minstrels would go from village to village, and they would point to a section on the scroll and they would tell a story that was illustrated on the scroll, or they would also tell of news events. So it was a way to keep people outside of the city in the loop of contemporary events and be entertained as well. Now, this tradition, although to a much lesser extent, continues in rural West Bengal to this day. And this is a yama pot from the 21st century. And we know the artists for it. It's Momin Chitrakar and Rabani Chitrakar. And those are last names that tell us that they're from this community. Once again, the painters and the singers who point to this. So these yama pots, which show yama and then the types of punishment that someone could receive, are also very old. And at the top, so the singers would start with Yama in his darbar. He's surrounded by these two demon attendants, and very typical of the pot scrolls. The art is very bold. It's got these strong colors. It's kind of a folk art and these thick lines. And then going down the scroll, we see some of the possible punishment. We see some of the possible punishments. This guy is being dragged by an oxen in water. I imagine that he was probably cruel to animals. And look at those eyes. He looks utterly mortified. And I love the way the cow here looks like smiling. And I can only imagine that this woman here was probably, she was probably a liar. She's having her tongue cut out, or she was an adulteress. And here we have a depiction of the presenter showing how these scrolls are actually used. Now, to bring this into the contemporary period, this is another Yamapat that would be used to get out the message of how to protect against HIV and AIDS. And so here we see Yama up in, once again, where he goes according to the iconography of these Yamapods, with his maw open, and there is a couple, a naked couple in embrace. So that's where it starts. And then we have these little sections of vendors selling condoms. So it's a way visually, and textually to get the message out of how to protect against this disease. So the minstrel would unroll the scroll, and the accompanying text that he or she would read is, "Listen, everyone, pay attention. I would like to talk about HIV/AIDS. HIV came from the West and has infected hundreds in India. It spreads from 4 things: using the same syringe for addiction, using the same syringe for injection, from pregnant HIV carrier women, or having unprotected sex with infected women. That's why I request the doctors, the syringes for injection should be changed. In case of blood transfusion, the blood has to be checked first. If a pregnant mother carries a baby, it can be born infected. I appeal to all Indians to use Nirod condoms, which is a government certified brand. If anybody has AIDS, don't keep it secret. Get admitted to the district hospital. You can test your blood in confidence, paying rupees 10 in VCTC centers. 10 rupees is like a penny. So, although not entirely covering the way it's spread, obviously, this is a way to get out public service messages, which is really ingenious. And this is still going on, and it's a very old tradition within northeastern India. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that I hope these works of art from these 3 indigenous South Asian religious traditions have illustrated the point of art, how art can be didactic and how it can be functional, and its role in disseminating seminal messages in these religious traditions. And also, if you find yourself reborn in a very comfortable heaven, don't get too comfortable. And if you find yourself being basted on flames, don't despair, it's not forever. Thank you very much.